There's nothing worse than being born with a higher intellect than others. Nobody felt this more than Davian. He had an interest in psychology from a young age and would confine himself in his father's study, often being found surrounded by an ocean of books on the floor. Perhaps he was so interested in human psychology because of his social standing. He was born a king's son, a prince, I guess, but not just the son of any king. The only son of a beloved king, so it felt as if he was the son of all the people in the city. He was treated like family no matter where he went and was constantly showered with gifts, praise, and admiration. But Davian never felt the love for the people that they felt for him. He could never figure out the reason. It wasn't that the gifts were terrible, they were, but they weren't the reason he felt that way. It's because they were peasants. I'm joking. He couldn't figure it out. But as he continued his studies, finally he figured it out. The people weren't his. The people don't care for Prince Davian. They care for the son of the king. The love for his father is so great it just happened to trickle down to him. Which makes sense, because what has he done to make the people love him? All he has done in his life so far is come out of a vagina, read books inside the castle, wave at people from a carriage, and walk around surrounded by guards. Far from a man of the people. He's not his father, and he worried that as he gets older and starts to be judged separate from the king, he will be judged under a microscope. Simple mistakes will be magnified and accomplishments will be minimized. Everything good that he'll do for the people will give the reaction that of course he did it. Look who his father is. But any mistake will be seen as egregious. How could the son of a king be so fucking dumb? But if history holds, most sons of kings are fucking dumb. Despite the worries, Davian didn't hate his father. He loved him with all his heart. After all, he was the only parent he had. His mother died soon after giving birth, so he has no memory of her. He just didn't want to be treated as if he and his father were one entity. Still, his father is young, so the worries of a young man is just that. Puberty has just taken a hold of him, I guess. His father is young, and these worries will subside in the future, surely, but things never work out so easily. The boy's father came down with an illness. He declined over the next few years before he finally passed. Davian's father was given a funeral fit for a hero and had his dead body paraded around the street for everyone to mourn. The city lay dead for a month after his father's passing, and some citizens wore black the entire time. Dramatic much. For Davian, however, the day they burned his father was the day he stopped mourning. After all, he was now a 15-year-old king. For Davian, the days continued as usual. He holed himself up in the study and continued reading and his education. He was only 15 and nobody was taking him serious as the king. The advisors of his father had no interest in giving a brat any power. He was king in name and soon saw that while his father was a good person, those who followed him was human garbage. The advisors were power-hungry. Davian started to wonder if his father was poisoned. But that doesn't matter much to him. Because Davian didn't care, he didn't care for the kingdom. The people were not his, they loved his father, not him. Why stand up for people that aren't mine, is what he thought. He was a terrible king, despite being on the job for just a couple months. The city began to fall into ruin, and the people were at the advisors' and nobles' mercy. In the 3 years until Davian became an adult, the destruction of the city was unimaginable. The taxes implemented left people struggling. Massive feasts were being held inside the castle walls, feasts that Davian wasn't invited to. Perhaps because he has the personality of a sea cucumber. The people, however, could barely scrape together bread and soup. I say soup, but it was more of just a flavored water. The cheers that would happen would Davian would take the carriage out, turned into blank stares and scorn from the malnourished public. Many businesses in the city turned their back and moved on to a more wealthy city. Every city has its ghetto, but Davian's city has become one big ghetto in itself. Where drugs were rampant, illegal trade happens often, murder, human trafficking, and much more. The city's guards had become lazy from corruption, often taking bribes and turning a blind eye to a lot of crime going on. how easily a city can fall to corruption. Finally, on a rather dreadful afternoon, the general of the military barged into Davion's study demanding to be ordered to take action. The man's name was Dante. He was the only person Davion trusted. He was his last family remaining. Dante was his father's right-hand man, and something like an uncle to Davion. He had finally had enough of everything that was happening in the city. He told Davion, if he does nothing, he will start a coup and take the city for himself. There's too many people making a mockery of the city he and Davion's father built. I suppose it's time, is what Davion thought. See, Davion isn't stupid. As I said, he was born with a high intellect. What he allowed to happen is what he felt was necessary to bring the people to his side. True, the kingdom was already doing well at the time of his father's death. Davion could have tried to at least keep the status quo. But a kingdom is a living thing in itself, and hardships come and go. A bad harvest, a few bad trades, a couple bad years, Davion could have seen the people turn against him. After all, he is not his father. He doesn't have the trust of the people that would allow for him to make the hard decisions to navigate through hard times. So he used the fact that people still thought of him as young and ignorant. Davion used Dante as a gauge of the people. So once he finally had enough, Davion figured the people had suffered enough, and it's time to take action. It won't be hard to bring in the perpetrators, as the names has always been in Davion's head. It's easy to make someone sloppy. Just give them the impression that they're smarter than you, and they will easily show you their hand. Davion had all the documents brought to his quarters, as the king had to personally stamp them. At first, it was small mistakes that Davion didn't notice. He would stamp them, and the advisors would see. This gave them the impression that Davion wasn't ever reading the documents and would just stamp them. He only had the documents brought to his quarters to role-play king. So soon they started adding small crimes in with the documents, a bit of embezzlement carefully lined into the documents. Even if Davion noticed them, he would stamp it the same. But soon it became blatant, as if to taunt him, no longer hiding the backhanded deals they were making with criminals. One that stood out was a maid in the castle named Mary that caught a noble's fancy. She was sold to him and became a slave to his desires. Davion remembered how she passed and will ensure her abuser shares a similar fate. All the records were handed over to Dante. Every embezzlement, human trafficker, drug user, betrayers of the city that were giving their enemies secrets. All the spies in the kingdom that nobles allowed in. Davion instructed Dante to bring everyone on this list, including their families. Do not miss a single one. The son should not be punished for the sins of the father. But who cares in this instance? There is no place for morals here. The people want blood shed, and Davion will make sure they see it. His reign is going to start in dramatic fashion. The advisors were brought one by one and put in cells. Davion then made his way down to view his assistants. They cursed at him and sung their innocence, but all Davion could do was smile. He could thank them for how well this went, after all, if didn't have to go this way. Had they been moral people who truly thought the best for the city, things would have been different, and Davion's strategy to make the people love him would have to change. Thank God, humans are greedy, and it only takes a little power for the devil to seep his claws in them. Davion leveled with them and calmly explained not to worry. They won't be imprisoned long. He'll speak to Dante and ensure it personally. All the advisors and nobles breathed a sigh of relief, which soon turned to them, holding their breath in shock. Davion explained that in 3 days' time, there will be no cell in this world that will be able to hold them, because they will no longer be in this world. He's going to call the citizens to the town square and hold a public execution. In those 3 days, none of the prisoners were fed. They've eaten enough of the people's food to last a lifetime. Lucky for them, they only have to last 3 days. Once again, Davion was truly grateful they were human scum. He may have felt bad doing this to regular prisoners. This execution will allow him to rise a great king, and they will begin to forget the former. The people have loved his father, and then suffered after his reign will attribute a bit of the despair they've endured to him as well. They will see him as a poor judge of character at the very least, for his advisors caused the fall of the city. Davion doesn't want to dishonor the dead, but he questioned how long must he respect him for. He's satisfied now that he not only have he people's love, but their devotion as well. Love and faith is a dangerous pair. It must be what a god feels like Davion thought. Once you have both, no matter the torment they must endure, they will always come back to you. Not that Davion will take advantage of his people, but it's nice to know that the option is there if needed. It allows for a strategy most others do not have available to them. When people adore their leaders, they are willing to suffer more for them. As the malnourished nobles walked through the streets, they weren't skin and bones, but they were definitely weak. It was a 30-minute walk to the square from the prison. As they struggled to walk, even if they fallen, were pulled along by horse and the others. Some were dragged across the ground the entire time. The walk took an hour because of how slow they were, to the enjoyment of the people, as they began taking out their years of frustration. Throwing rocks, food, cursing at them, people were lining the streets in anticipation of their deaths. Finally reaching their final stage, multiple executioners joined them, axe in hand. Then, one by one, the axe came down, separating their head from their body. The people cheered in a frenzy the entire time. Their cheers then turned to Davion, ecstatic that the rightful leader was now in place. Davion gave a speech blaming the advisors and nobles for the reason the people had suffered. How he was an ignorant child, and once he saw the torment his people were being put through, he could no longer sit still. Him and Dante wanted to take action much sooner, but wanted to ensure that all evildoers were caught and punished justly. Then Davion gave a speech. I promise to lead much like my father before, and never let such atrocities happen again. My father was tricked by these people believing they were his allies that wanted best for the people. Little did he know they would poison him and leave him for dead. Davion doesn't know if his father was poisoned, but the people would believe it regardless, considering what they've been through. If you give me a chance, I promise to regain our former glory and lead this city to new heights. As Davion finished his speech, the crowd roared. They yelled praise at Davion, and Davion returned to the castle, becoming the beloved king he always wished for.